All right. Simple air conditioning system, a compressor, 2 tanks, a metering device, and it's just for the illustration, really. High vapor pressure leaves the compressor, vapor condenses into a liquid, the metering device lowers the pressure, the liquid boils into a vapor, the low pressure vapor returns to the compressor. That is our refrigeration cycle. So here's our compressor. We don't have a saturation temperature or pressure yet, but our ambient air is 95 degrees, our return air is 75 degrees. And here we finally defined this as our condenser. Coming out of the compressor, we've got 278 psig and 125 degrees. Of course, coming out of the compressor, we've got the heat of compression to deal with, our superheat from the other side, and the heat of that compressor itself, the heat of it, heat of work, let's call it. As we cool down in here, it does come into here as a hot gas. We've already cooled down 10 degrees to 165. As soon as we cool this stuff down to that 125 point, now we're going to start condensing, turning in from a gas to a liquid. We're going to do that from here all the way down to there at 278 psig. That pressure is very important. We're under high pressure because in many ways we are squeezing this gas together and forcing it into a liquid. Then we start to cool it down and it will readily turn into a liquid. As it cools down and cools down, of course, there's no temperature change, but instead a change of state, what we call latent heat. And finally, when the last little bubble of refrigerant is gone, it's complete liquid, now we can begin to subcool. We've gone from 125 to 115, that is 10 degrees worth of subcooling, and we move on to the metering device. Now we're at 105, so we've cooled down an additional 10 degrees of subcooling, and we hit our metering device. The metering device can be any number of applications. It can be a capillary tube. It can be a little bullet-like device with the tiniest little hole in it. It can be an AXV or an automatic expansion valve, a TXV, a thermostatic expansion valve, or an EEV, an electronic expansion valve. But we go through our expansion valve and we come out of this expansion valve in a completely different way. Now we're under very low pressure, just like in high pressure when we were squeezing the liquid together. We are in low pressure now, so now this liquid desperately wants to become a gas. As we come out of here, 25% of that liquid that went into the metering device is going to come out and flash into a gas instantly. That flash gas is going to rob the other 75% of the heat energy it needed to become a gas. And so it heads toward the evaporator. As it goes into the evaporator, there's quite a bit of liquid. 75-25 relationship is still in play. And it begins to boil off as we run heat from the house, the refrigeration products, whatever it is. As we run that heat across the coil, that refrigerant begins to boil off. It boils off and boils off. It's at 69 psig, that is 40 degrees for this particular refrigerant. And finally, when the last little droplet of liquid is gone, we can begin to superheat. We were 40 degrees this whole time as we changed states, not temperature, states, from liquid to gas. Now that we are completely gas, we can take on more heat. And that is the heat we call superheat. We've gone from 40 degrees to 50 to 60 in this demonstration. We are still at 69 psig. And now we can come into our compressor. Remember, a compressor cannot pump liquid. Simple medium temperature refrigeration systems. Compare the previous AC system illustration to the following refrigeration system. Are the high side pressures and temperatures of both systems different? Why or why not? Are the low side pressures and temperatures of the two systems different? Why or why not? Okay, back to our demonstration, except now we have what appears to be an automatic expansion valve. I'm calling it that at this point because we don't have a bulb sensing our superheat. Once again, ambient air is 95, but the box temperature is 35. We're no longer dealing with an air conditioner, we're dealing with a cooler. We're coming out still 278, 125 degrees, coming out of the compressor at 175, cooling off by the time we actually get into the condenser at 165. We're at 278 psig, 125. You will notice that is the exact same temperature we came out of the air conditioner as. So let's continue. Same thing all the way down, even in the subcooling range. But now we've got a different suction pressure. Rather than 69 psig, we're at 49 psig. That is 25 degrees. Still, the same thing happens here. 25% flashes into a gas, robbing the heat for the other 75% to turn into a gas. So it's going to have to obtain that heat in our evaporator. Now, of course, we're not getting air from the inside of the house. We're getting air from the inside of our walk-in refrigerator, our domestic refrigerator, our reach-in refrigerator, what have you. We continue to boil off the refrigerant until we get the last little drop of liquid gone. We can begin to superheat, but you'll notice our superheat's gone from a 25 or a 40 degree to a 50 degree relationship. Now it's 25 to 35 degrees, and finally 20 degrees at the entrance to the compressor at 45 degrees. So the temperature over here has not changed, the temperature over here has. Why has the temperature here not changed? The important part is the ambient air is 95 degrees. We absolutely have to be, at least in the most efficient systems, 20 degrees above the ambient temperature. In standard systems, 30 degrees above the ambient temperature. Standard AC systems with fixed metering devices. Similar to the previous slide, but uses piping instead of tanks for illustration. This will be the type of illustration used throughout the book. Obviously, the tanks are going to be inferior. Of course, if we were talking about a hydronic system, those tanks would be just fine because that's exactly what is in a hydronic system. It's just the tanks would have a coil of its own inside. Low pressure liquid droplets enter the evaporator. The refrigerant absorbs heat as it vaporizes. The compressor increases the refrigerant pressure. The refrigerant rejects heat as it condenses. The metering device lowers liquid pressure. And here we have our compressor, our two coils now, our metering device, and our evaporator. Our ambient air temperature is still 95. Our return air temperature is 75, so we're talking about high temperature refrigeration or air conditioning, depending on what you want to call it. Right up there, we're looking at 69 psig, that is 40 degrees. I guess we're starting here at the evaporator. Once again, the 75 and 25 relationship, 25% flashing into a gas instantly. We pick up extra heat in the evaporator, boiling the refrigerant off into a gas. We're fully evaporated by the end of it, and now we're picking up our superheat going into the compressor. The compressor is going to compress that refrigerant. Of course, the compressor motor is hot. We're going to use the refrigerant to cool down that compressor motor. So there's some heat we're going to pick up. We picked up 20 degrees of superheat getting to the compressor. So there's some heat. We're not getting rid of any of that heat. We've got the superheat, the heat from the compressor motor, and then anytime you compress something, you've got the heat of compression as well. So we're going to come out of this pretty warm, 175 degrees. Of course, we're talking quite a few degrees over our ambient temperature of 95 degrees. So it's going to shed that heat into the atmosphere quite quickly. By the time we get into by the time it starts showing red, we've exhausted all of our superheat and we are beginning to condense once more. There's no temperature change through the condenser until we have alleviated ourselves of the last bubble of gas refrigerant. And now we can subcool because we have made that change of state, and now we can actually cool down the liquid refrigerant. Commercial refrigeration systems with the TEV metering device. Comparing refrigeration to AC systems. Same output ambient. That ambient is going to have a great amount of effect on that system. And we're going to talk about compression ratios and other things like that, and you'll see how that makes a difference. Same condenser pressure and temperatures. Lower indoor space temperature, lower evaporator pressure and temperatures. Here we go again. AC and refrigeration condensing conditions are basically the same. And I must say amen to that. Hey, we've got an actual TXV now because you can see the bulb is monitoring our superheat. We also have a receiver here, so it can pull off liquid and liquid only. We need a solid column of liquid going to our metering device. But as you see, regardless, we don't know whether this is a refrigerator or a freezer or what it is over here, but our coil is outside, so the same temperatures and pressures are going to be maintained as long as we use the same refrigerant. Now we've defined something. Our box temperature is 35 degrees. So we're going to run a 25-degree coil, and then we will warm up with our superheat, go into the compressor, picking up 20 degrees. Now, I'd just like to say here, 20 degrees isn't your normal superheat, but it's just for this demonstration. Walk-in refrigerants used in most commercial refrigeration systems. Walk-in refrigerators, R22 is probably very prevalent in the industry still. The new refrigerant everyone's switching over to is 404A. 134A is extremely popular for refrigerators. Most of your domestic refrigerators will run 134A. Walk-in freezers, 404A. 404A is a lot better refrigerant for a low pressure or a low temperature system than it is for a medium temperature system like our walk-in refrigerator. I think that probably ought to be 134A there. Of course, in the reach-in refrigerator, they have 134A listed. Suppose you'd have to if every domestic refrigerator in the United States is 134A. Reach-in refrigerators, we're back to 404A. Note, after 2010, R22 systems are no longer manufactured in the United States, but believe you me, buddy, they've got ways around that. 404A must be charged in a liquid state. Remember, anytime you're dealing with anything in the 400 series, those are going to be mixtures of refrigerant that must be charged as a liquid. Because they're mixtures, if you charge them gas, the first gas will come off the top completely before the next gas will. So you've got to charge it as a liquid. Some of these are mixtures of 3 and even 4 gases, so that becomes even more important. 4 basic components of a refrigeration system. You know what, I'm just going to pause. Let's name them. Evaporator. Condenser. Compressor. Metering device. There we go. You better know. Metering device lowers the refrigerant temperature below the space temperature. Evaporator absorbs heat as the refrigerant evaporates. Compressor increases the refrigerant temperature above the ambient temperature, and the condenser rejects heat from the refrigerant as vapor condenses. So there we've got our 4 basic pieces. Now there is piping that goes in between. What do we call the piping that goes from the compressor to the condenser? Discharge. What do we call the piping from the condenser to the metering device? Liquid line. And we call the piping from the evaporator to the compressor the suction line. Excellent.
So we have discharge
line,
liquid line,
and suction line. And that's that.